It was the middle of August 2021 when everything started. The summer had been dry and quiet, and the forest around the Cascade Range in Oregon looked peaceful, almost too peaceful. The tall pines stood still under the sun, their needles glowing a pale green in the light. It was the kind of place where people came to escape the noise of life, a place where cell signals faded and the sound of running water replaced traffic. But for the park rangers who worked there, it was more than just a pretty landscape. It was their responsibility, their daily home, and for one ranger in particular, it was his world. Ethan Cole had worked in those mountains for years. People who knew him said he was calm, kind, and patient, the kind of person who could talk for hours about trees, weather patterns, or old hiking trails. He was never the loudest in the room, but he noticed things most people missed. When visitors got lost, he was always the first to volunteer to search. He believed every missing person in the forest deserved someone who wouldn't give up. That's what made his disappearance so strange. On August 13, 2021, Ethan left the ranger station early in the morning for what should have been a routine patrol. He had done this same route dozens of times, checking trail markers, inspecting campsites, and making sure there were no fire hazards. He told his coworker that he wanted to walk a section near an old off-trail area known as Whispering Hollow. Most rangers avoided it, not because it was dangerous exactly, but because it was confusing. The paths there twisted in strange ways, overgrown with moss and roots. GPS often failed under the thick canopy. Some old-timers said compasses spun in circles out there, though no one knew why. That morning, Ethan packed light, a radio, a small backpack with food and water, and his notebook. He joked that if he wasn't back by nightfall, it meant the forest had finally decided to keep him. No one laughed much at that later. Around noon, another ranger at the station heard from him over the radio. Ethan's voice sounded calm. He mentioned he was near Whispering Hollow, checking some damage to fallen trees after a storm. He said he might explore a bit farther down an unmarked path to confirm a possible landslide. It was nothing unusual. Rangers did that all the time. The call ended normally, just a short, "I'll check back soon." That was the last anyone ever heard from him. By evening, the station tried to reach him again. No reply. They assumed his radio battery had died, which wasn't uncommon in the deep woods. But when night fell and there was still no sign of him, they grew worried. The next morning, a full search began. The search teams covered miles of dense forest, first on foot, then with helicopters. They used tracking dogs and drones. For days, volunteers joined, combing through every inch of trail. They found signs of his footsteps leading into Whispering Hollow, but they faded quickly. The ground there was soft, layered with moss and fallen branches that hid any clear tracks. No one could understand it. Ethan wasn't reckless. He knew the forest better than almost anyone. He always carried backup maps, emergency gear, and water. It didn't make sense that he could just vanish. The official report said, presumed lost in terrain, but everyone at the ranger station knew there had to be more to it. His friends and co-workers didn't believe he simply got lost. Something about the area always felt off. The locals started talking. Whispering Hollow had always been the subject of strange stories. Whispers about hidden tunnels from old mining days, lights seen through the trees, or sounds at night that didn't belong to animals. Most people brushed it off as folklore. But now, with a ranger gone, those old tales came back. Ethan's family arrived a few days later. His sister Mara was the one who couldn't let it go. She stood near the trail entrance every day, talking to the search teams, refusing to leave. She said Ethan loved the forest too much to run away, and too much to take unnecessary risks. When she talked about him, her eyes stayed clear, but her voice carried something heavy, like she already knew she wouldn't get him back, but still hoped to. Weeks passed. The weather turned. The search was scaled down. By September, the forest had gone quiet again. The rangers packed up their tents and equipment. The posters with his face on them faded in the rain. Eventually, the area reopened, though some sections near Whispering Hollow remained closed to the public for safety. For most people, the story ended there, just another unexplained disappearance in the wild. But for those who knew Ethan, it didn't sit right. There were too many questions. Some of the searchers reported hearing odd noises while they were out there, low humming sounds that came and went without warning. Others said they found sections of forest floor that felt hollow when stepped on, like there was something beneath. When they tried to dig, the soil was packed with roots and stones too hard to move without heavy tools. It was dismissed as natural terrain, but a few thought otherwise. Ethan's cabin near the ranger station stayed empty after that. His things were left mostly untouched, his hiking boots by the door, his map spread across the desk, and a small photograph pinned to the wall of him and his sister smiling in front of a waterfall. It was strange how such small details could make his absence feel bigger. In time, other rangers were assigned to his routes. New names came and went. But Whispering Hollow never felt the same. People said radio still acted funny in that area. Signals cutting in and out, static echoing even when no one was speaking. Every August after that, Mara came back. She walked the trail herself, following her brother's route as closely as she could, leaving small markers along the way. She said it helped her feel closer to him even if it hurt. 2 years passed like that. The world moved on, but she didn't. The ranger station had replaced his locker, removed his name from the roster, and filed away his case in storage. But Mara kept digging, asking questions, reading old park records, even reaching out to former loggers and researchers who once worked in the area decades ago. She found mentions of something strange. An old government research site rumored to have existed under that part of the forest in the 1950s. It had been sealed off and forgotten long before Ethan was born. There was no solid proof, just bits of maps and vague references, but it made her wonder if her brother had stumbled onto something he wasn't meant to find. Still, that was all theory. The official word was simple: park ranger missing, presumed dead. Yet even with no evidence, people couldn't stop thinking about what had really happened. Some said he might have fallen into a hidden sinkhole or underground cave. Others believed he got disoriented and went too deep into the unmarked terrain. A few thought he left clues that hadn't been found yet. A journal entry, a trail mark, something that would explain everything. But for 2 long years, nothing surfaced. No one came across his backpack badge or even a single piece of his uniform. It was like the forest had swallowed him completely. The forest itself changed during that time. Fires came and went, storms shifted the ground, and new growth covered old scars. The same paths Ethan had walked slowly disappeared under layers of moss and fallen pine needles. It was as if nature had quietly erased his trail, one step at a time. Still, those who had known him couldn't shake the feeling that the forest remembered. The silence around Whispering Hollow felt heavier than before. Even seasoned hikers said they didn't like camping near that area anymore. Some described hearing faint metallic sounds echoing through the trees at night, soft, distant, and rhythmic, like an engine running somewhere underground. People said the air there felt different too, colder even on warm days. The ground seemed softer, the shadows longer, but it was all subtle, easy to dismiss as imagination. For most, Ethan Cole became just another mystery, a story told around campfires and YouTube videos about strange disappearances. But for his sister, it wasn't just a mystery. It was unfinished business. She always said the forest didn't take people without leaving something behind. She just had to find what it left. And in time, someone would. 2 years after he vanished in the autumn of 2023, 2 hikers would make a discovery that would reopen the entire case and reveal something buried deep beneath the forest floor. But that part of the story was still ahead. For now, the only thing left in 2021 was silence, the sound of wind through trees, the rustle of branches, and the unspoken question that hung in the air. How does someone who knows every trail, every sound, every secret of the forest simply disappear without a trace? No one had the answer yet. But the forest did. 2 years had passed since Ranger Ethan Cole disappeared, and yet the memory of him still hung quietly around the Cascade Forest. For the new rangers, his story was something they heard during training, a reminder to stay cautious, to never take the wilderness lightly. But for those who had worked with him, it wasn't a lesson. It was a wound that never really closed. The ranger station had changed since that summer. There were new uniforms, new staff, and even a few digital upgrades. But in the break room, his old coffee mug still sat on the shelf. Nobody had the heart to throw it away. Someone had written his initials on the bottom with a marker, and though the letters were fading, people still noticed it. Little things like that made him feel present, even when everyone knew he was gone. His sister Mara never stopped coming back. Every August, she would drive her old truck up the long gravel road that led to the station, park at the same spot, and walk the trail into Whispering Hollow. It didn't matter if it was raining, snowing, or sunny. She came. The other rangers respected her but didn't always know what to say. They tried to comfort her, but she wasn't there for sympathy. She said she just wanted to keep looking. Over time, she had gathered her own small collection of notes and maps. They were kept in a worn leather folder, filled with old ranger logs, printouts of satellite images, and handwritten observations. She marked every spot where search teams had gone, every area that hadn't been properly explored, and every strange report that came from hikers afterward. One of those reports caught her attention. A couple of backpackers had written online about hearing low, humming sounds near Whispering Hollow late at night. They said it sounded like machinery running deep underground, though there were no roads or power lines anywhere nearby. Most people dismissed it, but Mara wrote it down. It reminded her of something her brother had said on the radio before he vanished, and something about hearing engines under the ground. That one line from his last call stayed with her. She played the radio recording again and again, until she could almost hear the wind in the background. She tried to imagine what he might have seen that day. What could have drawn him deeper into that part of the woods? She didn't believe in ghosts or legends, but she also didn't believe that her brother simply got lost. Back at the ranger station, not everyone shared her determination. Some thought she was holding on too tightly. A few quietly said she should move on, but she didn't listen. She said she wasn't looking for closure. She was looking for the truth. Whispering Hollow itself remained a strange place. It was quieter than the rest of the forest, almost unnaturally so. The trees there grew close together, their branches woven like a ceiling that blocked most of the light. The ground stayed damp even in dry weather. Animals seemed to avoid it. You could walk for an hour and not hear a single bird. For some people, it felt peaceful. For others, it felt unsettling. Mara had walked those paths so many times that she could recognize every fallen log and twisted root. She left small ribbons tied to branches as markers, each one a reminder of how far she had gone. Sometimes she would stop and just listen, to the wind, to the creaking of trees, to her own heartbeat. She said the forest spoke if you were quiet enough. One day in early spring 2023, she met two hikers near the ranger station who said they had camped close to Whispering Hollow the night before. They were young and curious, the type who liked to explore the paths less traveled. They told her about strange patterns they saw in the ground, circles where the moss didn't grow, as if something had disturbed the soil underneath. They also mentioned finding an old signpost with no writing left on it, just the faint outline of paint that might have once spelled out restricted. That word sent a chill through her. Later, she looked through old county records and found something interesting. A 1956 document describing temporary field operations in that same area. It didn't say what kind of operations, only that they were related to geological testing. There were no follow-up reports, no maps, no closure notes. It was like the whole thing had been quietly erased. That discovery made her even more certain that the area held secrets. But what kind? She wasn't sure. It could have been nothing more than old mining tunnels. But if so, why were there no records of them being sealed or mapped? Why did the sound of machinery still seem to echo from beneath the forest floor, decades later? Back at her small apartment in town, she kept Ethan's notebook. It had been returned to her after the investigation, just one of many items found in his locker. Most of it was routine, weather observations, maintenance notes, and trail updates. But a few pages toward the end felt different. His handwriting became hurried, uneven. He had written short lines like "trees sound different here" and something metallic in the soil. On the final page, the writing stopped mid-sentence. That was the part that haunted her. It wasn't what he wrote. It was what he didn't get to finish. Sometimes she wondered if the forest had taken him because he had found something it wanted to keep hidden. Other times she thought maybe it was simpler, that he slipped, fell, or got lost. But deep down she couldn't accept that. It wasn't like him. Every few months, small search groups would still go out there. Not officially, just volunteers or curious hikers who had heard about the story online. Most found nothing. A few claimed they saw strange lights at night, like a faint glow between the trees. Photos were blurry and inconclusive. Still, the mystery spread across forums and social media. becoming one of those unsolved forest disappearance stories that fascinated people around the world. To the rangers who worked there daily, it was more than just a story. Whispering Hollow had a way of changing the way people felt. Radios still crackled with static near certain points. GPS devices would suddenly lose signal, then come back with coordinates that didn't make sense, as if the forest itself was bending the rules. One ranger said he once heard faint voices over the radio, even though no one else was broadcasting. Another said he found deep impressions in the ground that looked like tracks, but too large and evenly spaced to be human or animal. Everyone had their version, but no one had proof. By mid-2023, the story had faded from headlines, but never from memory. The world had moved on to other news. Only Mara and a handful of people still kept searching. Then, something changed. In late September, heavy rains swept through the Cascades. Trails were washed out, bridges damaged, and paths blocked by fallen trees. For a few weeks, hikers avoided the area completely. But once the weather cleared, small groups started to return. Among them were two friends who decided to take a detour off the main trail to avoid the mud. They walked deeper than most visitors ever did, right toward Whispering Hollow. What they found that day would change everything. It started small. One of them tripped over something hard buried under the moss. At first, they thought it was just a rock, but when they brushed the dirt away, they saw a glint of metal. It was round, dull, and rusted, but when they cleaned it off, they could just make out the engraving. Park Ranger, E. Cole. They froze. The air around them felt heavier. They called for each other, unsure what to do next. A few feet away, they noticed the ground looked uneven, like something had been disturbed years ago. They began to dig carefully, using their hands and a small camping tool. Beneath the damp earth, they uncovered what looked like an old metal box, a military style, with heavy locks and dents from years of exposure. Inside was a flashlight, a notebook, and something else that caught the sunlight. A small drone, its propellers broken, its camera lens shattered. It was a strange mix of objects, buried just deep enough to be hidden but not forgotten. The hikers didn't try to open the notebook. They closed the case and hiked back to the nearest ranger outpost to report what they had found. By nightfall, word had reached the authorities. The discovery was confirmed, and the next morning a full investigation was reopened for the first time in 2 years. Mara got the call at dawn. She didn't speak at first. She just sat in silence, gripping the phone, her eyes filling with tears. Part of her had always believed that one day the forest would give something back. Now it finally had. No one yet knew what the notebook said or what was on the drone's memory card. But for the first time in 2 years, there was hope, and with it a wave of questions that no one was prepared to answer. The forest had stayed silent for a long time, but now it seemed ready to tell its story, and what it revealed next would be far stranger than anyone expected. When the news broke about the discovery, it spread quietly at first. The hikers who found the buried box had reported it without much thought, expecting maybe it belonged to an old camper or hunter. But once the rangers confirmed that the badge inside belonged to Ranger Ethan Cole, the story reignited overnight. For the people who remembered the case, it was like opening an old wound. After 2 long years of silence, suddenly there was something tangible, proof that Ethan had been there, that he hadn't just vanished into thin air. The ranger station turned into a busy place again. Investigators arrived, the forest entrance was taped off, and forensic teams came in with equipment and ground scanners. The hikers who found the box were interviewed several times. They said the ground looked disturbed, as if something had been buried there after the disappearance. It wasn't deep, only a foot or so below the surface, covered in moss and roots. It seemed intentional, almost like someone had wanted it to be found later. Inside the box was the ranger's badge, a notebook wrapped in plastic, a broken flashlight, and the remains of a small drone. The drone was old, scratched, and partially melted from moisture, but it still had a memory card inside. That detail caught everyone's attention. The drone wasn't standard ranger equipment. Ethan must have brought it himself, maybe to film trail damage or monitor wildlife. But if he had used it that day, then the footage might reveal what really happened to him. Mara was called to the ranger station to identify the items. When she saw the badge, her hands shook. She had seen it before, of course. He used to wear it clipped to his chest, polished so the light reflected off it when he smiled. She traced her fingers over the engraved letters, whispering his name softly, as if speaking it out loud might bring him back. The investigators told her they were sending the notebook and drone to a lab to be examined carefully. She asked if she could see the notebook first, even briefly. They hesitated, but eventually allowed it under supervision. The pages were damp but still legible in parts. His handwriting was rushed and uneven toward the end, but one line stood out clearly. Lights in the trees again. Can't tell if they're reflections or moving. Heard the same noise and mechanical, underground. Her heart pounded as she read it. It matched exactly what she'd suspected all along. When she asked about the footage, the investigator said it would take time to recover. The memory card was damaged and needed professional data repair. But they promised to update her once anything was found. That night, the station felt heavy. Even though no one said it out loud, everyone could feel it. Something about this discovery didn't sit right. If Ethan had fallen or been attacked by an animal, why would his belongings be neatly buried? Who could have done that? Over the next few days, teams returned to the exact spot where the box had been found. They cleared the surrounding area and used ground-penetrating radar to scan for anything else beneath the surface. At first, nothing appeared. But on the third day, one of the scanners picked up faint shapes beneath the soil, uneven, curved, and metallic. It wasn't a body. It was something else. They began to dig carefully, removing layers of dirt and roots until they uncovered a patch of what looked like old metal flooring. The surface was rusted and covered in debris, but it was too flat and structured to be natural. It extended several meters wide, disappearing under a thick cluster of trees. When they tapped it, it made a hollow sound. The next day, the area was fully cordoned off, and a construction team was brought in to safely excavate. They found what appeared to be the collapsed entrance to an underground tunnel. Old beams and concrete framing hinted that it had been built decades ago. No one had any record of it. Local historians were called to help identify what it might be. Some guessed it was part of an old mining route. Others thought it could be a Cold War-era shelter or research tunnel. Whatever it was, it had been sealed long before Ethan's time, and yet, somehow, he had found his way to it. While the physical investigation continued, the digital forensics team worked on the drone footage. After weeks of recovery, they finally managed to extract a few short video clips. Mara was invited to view them privately. She sat in a dim room with two investigators watching as the screen flickered to life. The footage was shaky but clear enough to recognize the forest. Ethan's voice could be heard faintly in the background, describing trail conditions and tree damage. Just a normal ranger patrol at first. Then, about 3 minutes in, something changed. The audio picked up a faint humming sound. It grew louder as he moved toward a clearing. The forest around him looked darker, even though it was still daytime. The camera turned slightly, capturing flashes of light between the trees. Not sunlight, but small moving glows, steady and rhythmic, almost like beacons. He whispered something under his breath. The words were hard to make out. Then the video shook violently. There was a moment of silence, a flash of movement, and the camera dropped to the ground. The footage ended abruptly. No one spoke for a long moment. Mara just stared at the screen, frozen. It was the first time she had heard her brother's voice in 2 years. The investigators didn't jump to conclusions. They said it could have been a reflection from his flashlight or interference from the drone's sensors. The sound might have been an echo from wind or water underground. But even as they said it, they didn't sound convinced. A week later, excavation teams managed to clear part of the tunnel entrance. They lowered cameras and sensors inside, but it was too unstable to enter. The walls were caved in and the air inside was unsafe. Still, the equipment showed glimpses of old metal hallways, pipes, and what looked like machinery. It seemed that beneath the forest floor lay the remains of an underground facility, something built, used, and then forgotten. When Mara heard about it, she felt a mix of relief and dread. If her brother had stumbled onto that entrance, it might explain why he disappeared. Maybe he fell in and couldn't get out, or maybe someone else had sealed it afterward. The official investigation shifted direction. Records from the 1950s were re-examined. A few government archives mentioned Project Northline, a short-lived geological monitoring program in the Cascades. The documents were vague, filled with redacted sections, but they confirmed one thing. There had indeed been underground installations in that area. That discovery sparked public curiosity. News outlets began reporting on the Ranger Mystery Tunnel. People online created theories. Some said it was a forgotten Cold War lab, others thought it was an old energy project. A few even speculated it was something paranormal. But for Mara, it was personal. She didn't care about the theories. She only wanted to know if her brother had been trapped down there and if someone had known about it. As winter approached, work at the site slowed due to weather. The tunnel remained sealed off, waiting for safer excavation conditions. Mara stayed in town, visiting the site whenever she could. She brought flowers and left them near the trail, saying softly that she was getting closer to the truth. People around her noticed the change. She didn't look defeated anymore, she looked focused. Even the rangers who once thought she should move on now helped her whenever they could, sharing old maps and reports. It became a quiet community effort, not about proving legends, but about honoring someone they had all respected. Months later, when the snows melted, work resumed at the site. And just as the team prepared to enter the lower level of the tunnel for the first time, a new discovery surfaced, one that none of them expected. Deep inside the tunnel, behind a collapsed wall, the cameras picked up something metallic that didn't look like machinery or tools. It looked like a piece of equipment, modern and small, something that didn't belong to the 1950s. When they pulled it out, it was another drone, newer than the first, with a small Ranger tag still visible on its side. It was Ethan's backup drone. Everyone stopped. That meant he had been inside that tunnel, alive at least for a short while. The forest had finally started revealing its secrets, piece by piece. But as they soon learned, the deeper they dug, the stranger the truth became. And for Mara, the discovery only deepened the mystery. Her brother hadn't just vanished. He had found something the forest had been hiding for decades. Whatever it was waiting beneath the ground, silent and untouched until now. After the discovery of the second drone, everything about the case changed. What had once seemed like a sad mystery now felt like a puzzle that could finally be solved. For 2 years, everyone had believed Ethan Cole vanished somewhere in the forest. But now it was clear he had gone somewhere very specific, into the ground itself. The footage from the second drone took several days to recover. It was in better condition than the first, and this time, the data team managed to pull clear video clips. When the investigators played them back, it felt like watching the final pages of a story that had been stuck on pause for far too long. The video began the same way as the first. Ethan walking through the forest, his voice calm as he described the weather and terrain. He mentioned he was following a strange vibration in the ground, a steady rumbling sound that came and went. He said it reminded him of distant machinery. Then the camera tilted down to show something metallic, half buried in the dirt, hidden beneath a layer of moss. He tapped it gently with his boot and the sound was hollow. He said softly, "Feels like a door." The footage showed him clearing the soil away with his hands until a rusted handle appeared. When he pulled, the ground shifted slightly. Not enough to open, but enough to prove there was space below. The video flickered, showing flashes of his flashlight moving over dark earth. Then, without warning, the drone lifted off from the ground, controlled remotely by him, and moved toward what looked like a narrow opening. For a few seconds, the footage went black. Then suddenly it showed what was beneath the forest floor. The tunnel walls were lined with metal, coated in rust and roots. The air looked thick with dust. Pipes ran along the ceiling, and there were signs of old wiring. It wasn't a natural cave, it was man-made. The drone drifted deeper until it reached a small open space. There were crates, tools, and what looked like an old workbench covered in debris. Everything looked untouched for decades. Then the sound returned. A deep hum, rhythmic and mechanical, coming from farther below. The video shook slightly as if something underground was vibrating the camera. Ethan's voice came through again, low but clear. "I think I found something." The footage ended there. No one in the room spoke for several minutes after watching it. The silence was heavy. Mara sat frozen in her chair, staring at the blank screen. For 2 years she had imagined her brother's last moments, but seeing this felt different. It wasn't an accident. He had found something that no one else knew existed. The investigators decided to dig deeper, carefully this time with engineers and safety crews. The tunnel was fragile, and the risk of collapse was high, but they managed to secure a small section. They went down with cameras and lights following the path the drone had taken. It was just like in the video. Narrow metal corridors, rusted pipes, and forgotten equipment. The walls had markings in faded paint, symbols and numbers, the kind used in construction or military work. They even found pieces of old machinery that no one could identify. One of the engineers said the design reminded him of early Cold War infrastructure, possibly part of a monitoring site. But there was no record of any facility like this ever being built there. When the team reached the open space shown in the footage, they found traces of what looked like a small camp, torn fabric, an empty water bottle, and a flashlight with the initials EC carved into the handle. That was the first real proof that Ethan had made it down there alive. Mara visited the site when the news reached her. She stood near the entrance, staring into the dark tunnel as workers brought up debris and samples. It was hard to imagine her brother being down there, surrounded by silence, writing notes in his journal and trying to make sense of what he had found. She felt a strange mix of pride and sadness. He had always been curious, always willing to go one step farther than anyone else. Maybe that curiosity had led him here. Reporters started showing up again, though the authorities tried to keep details quiet. There were too many unanswered questions. Who built the tunnels, what they were for, and why there was still a faint hum coming from beneath them. Some scientists suggested it could be groundwater movement, while others thought it might be old machinery still running somewhere deep below. As the story grew, so did the speculation. Some people online called it the Whispering Hollow facility. Others claimed it was part of a secret research project, but the truth remained out of reach. Weeks passed and excavation continued slowly. Every day workers found something new. Fragments of equipment, pieces of paper sealed in metal boxes, and sections of wall with numbers painted in black ink. It was clear that whoever built this place had done it with precision. And then at some point they abandoned it and buried it so completely that even the forest forgot it existed. One afternoon, Mara was called back to the ranger station. The investigator told her they had finished examining the rest of Ethan's notebook. The final pages had been damaged, but with infrared scanning, they managed to read faint impressions left by his pen. The last full entry read, "Found entrance deeper than expected. Feels wrong to be here. Hearing movement below floor. Air feels charged like before a storm. Drone battery low, heading back after one more look." That was it. No goodbye, no panic, just quiet observation, the way he always wrote. It was as if he knew he was somewhere important, but didn't realize it would be the last thing he ever documented. After that, the pages were blank. The official conclusion came later. Ethan likely entered the tunnel through a weak section that collapsed afterward, trapping him inside. When the structure gave way, it sealed the entrance, making it impossible for rescuers to find him. It was ruled an accidental death, but Mara didn't believe it was that simple. She couldn't explain it, but something about the carefully buried box, the drone footage, and the strange hum that still echoed under the forest floor didn't fit that version of events. She stayed near the site for weeks, often walking alone at dusk, listening to the wind through the trees. Sometimes she thought she could still hear that faint mechanical sound, distant but steady, like a reminder that her brother's story wasn't finished. The rangers eventually reopened most of the forest, though the tunnel area was permanently restricted. They built a small memorial near the trailhead, a wooden sign with his name, service years, and a simple phrase. He walked where others wouldn't. Visitors left flowers and small tokens there. Some came out of respect, others out of curiosity. Even with all the answers they had, there were still pieces missing. Why had the tunnel been built in the first place? Who had buried his belongings so neatly, almost like they were meant to be found? Months later, one of the engineers analyzing soil samples from the tunnel noticed something unusual. The soil layers around the metal door Ethan had uncovered didn't match the rest of the forest floor. The upper layers were newer, disturbed within the last decade, not from natural erosion but from deliberate digging. That meant someone had reopened that tunnel less than 10 years ago, long after it was abandoned. When Mara heard that, her mind raced. Could someone have known about the facility and gone back there before Ethan? Or maybe someone else had been using it secretly. The thought made her uneasy. She tried to share her concerns, but by then the investigation had officially closed. To the authorities, the case was solved. To her, it was only half done. Sometimes she would visit the site alone and sit by the old trail sign, just listening. The forest had grown quiet again, the kind of quiet that hides things. She said the air still felt different near Whispering Hollow, colder, like the ground was holding its breath. It was strange how a place could look so peaceful while keeping something so heavy buried beneath it. By the end of that year, the project was officially over. The tunnels were sealed permanently for safety, and the files were archived. Mara took home her brother's notebook and the recovered drone footage, keeping them in a wooden box on her shelf. She didn't know if she'd ever get real closure. But she knew one thing. The forest had given her more truth than anyone else ever had. Still, on quiet nights when she replayed the drone footage, she sometimes noticed something no one else mentioned. In the last few seconds before the video cut off, when the light flickered, she thought she saw a faint shape at the end of the tunnel. It could have been a reflection, maybe dust or shadow. But every time she watched it, she felt the same chill. Maybe the forest wasn't done telling its story yet. Months passed after the tunnels were sealed. The forest returned to its quiet rhythm, and most people moved on from the story. What had once filled newspapers and online forums slowly faded into the background, becoming just another local mystery that people mentioned from time to time. But for Mara, it was never just a story. It was her brother's last chapter, and she couldn't bring herself to close the book completely. She stayed in the nearby town, working part-time at a visitor center where hikers came for maps and permits. Every morning, she looked out the window toward the tree line, where the forest began to rise in gentle slopes. It looked peaceful from a distance. Soft green light, the smell of pine and earth, birds calling in the distance, but she knew what was hidden below. Sometimes, when tourists asked about the old ranger who disappeared years ago, she would give them the short version, that he went missing during a survey, and his remains were found later underground. She didn't mention the tunnel or the strange metal structures or the sound that still lingered in her mind. Some stories, she felt, were too heavy for casual curiosity. Still, every evening, she would walk the same trail he had once patrolled. The path wound deep into the trees through patches of ferns and fallen branches. The forest had grown denser since the tunnels were sealed, almost as if nature itself wanted to cover every trace. She'd stop near the small wooden sign with his name carved into it and sit for a while listening. The air there was always still, too still sometimes. The birds avoided that part of the trail. Even the wind seemed to hesitate before crossing the area. And on some nights, when the sky was heavy with clouds and the forest felt alive with distant rustling, she could almost hear it again, that soft hum beneath the ground. It wasn't loud, just faint enough to make her question if it was real. But she always heard it from the same place, near where they had found the buried box. It came and went like a heartbeat, steady, mechanical, yet somehow alive. She mentioned it once to one of the old rangers who still worked there. He smiled kindly but said it was probably her imagination, or maybe underground water shifting through the rock. She nodded, but deep down she didn't believe that. She knew the sound too well. It was the same one her brother had written about. One evening near the end of summer, she found herself drawn back to that spot again. The air was warm, and a light fog hung low between the trees. She carried her brother's journal in her backpack, something she hadn't opened in months. When she reached the old clearing, she sat on a fallen log and set the book on her lap. She turned to the last entry, tracing her fingers over the faint handwriting. "Feels wrong to be here," he had written. "Air feels charged like before a storm," she whispered to the open air. "What did you find, Ethan?" The forest gave no answer, only the distant call of an owl somewhere above. Then, just as she was about to close the notebook, something shifted under her feet, a faint vibration, like a pulse in the soil. It lasted only a moment but was enough to make her freeze. She leaned forward and pressed her hand to the ground. The hum was still there, faint and steady. Her heart began to race. She looked around. The trees swayed gently and the fog thickened. She couldn't see more than a few feet ahead, but she knew this area better than anyone. The hum grew slightly louder, not harsh but deep, almost soothing. She pulled out her phone and turned on the voice recorder. "It's happening again," she whispered. Same sound as before, coming from the ground. She waited, letting the recorder capture the faint vibration. The sound came in waves, fading in and out. Then as she listened closely, she noticed something new. a rhythm within the sound like a slow pattern repeating. It reminded her of breathing. She took a step back. "This isn't just a machine," she said quietly. "It's something else." She didn't mean it literally. She didn't think the ground was alive. But there was something about it that didn't feel like a normal mechanical hum. It felt purposeful. The next morning, she brought the recording to a local geologist she knew. He listened to it with curiosity but said it didn't sound like anything geological. "If it's not groundwater or rock movement," he said, "it could be an old generator, maybe deeper than anyone found." But when Mara told him the tunnels had been sealed completely, he frowned. Then whatever's running, it's running on its own. That thought stayed with her for days. As the year went on, more hikers began visiting the forest again. Some came out of curiosity, others to see the place connected to the vanished ranger story. Mara didn't mind as long as they treated the forest with respect. But occasionally someone would wander too far off trail and mention strange things, hearing low vibrations at night, or seeing faint lights through the fog. She never told them they weren't imagining it. She'd just nod and tell them to stay on the path. One evening, close to autumn, she decided to visit one last time before the weather turned cold. She brought along a small lantern and her brother's journal, walking the familiar path through the quiet trees. The air was crisp and the leaves had begun to fall in golden waves. When she reached the clearing, she set the lantern on the ground and sat quietly. The hum wasn't there at first, just the normal stillness of the forest. But after a while, as the night deepened, it returned. Low, slow, steady. She closed her eyes and whispered, "I know you're still here." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. The hum seemed to respond, not louder, but steadier, almost rhythmic. It felt like an acknowledgement, a quiet reply from the earth itself. She smiled through tears. "I hope you found what you were looking for," she said softly. The forest stayed silent for a long time after that. Eventually she stood, picked up the lantern, and started back down the trail. The hum faded behind her, dissolving into the distance until only the sound of her footsteps remained. That night, she packed her things. She had decided to leave the town and move closer to her parents' home. It was time to start a new chapter, though she knew part of her heart would always stay in that forest. Before she left, she went to the visitor center one last time. She placed her brother's journal in a small glass display case near the entrance, along with a photograph of him standing in uniform, smiling in front of the trees. She added a note that read, "For those who search for answers, remember to listen. Not everything buried is meant to stay hidden." Years later, hikers still told stories about that place. Some said they could hear a faint hum deep underground if they stood still long enough. Others said they found strange metal fragments near the old trails, as if the earth was slowly pushing something back to the surface. But the story of the vanished ranger became more than just a mystery. It became a reminder that curiosity can uncover truths, but also awaken secrets that nature keeps for a reason. And sometimes, the quietest places hold the loudest echoes of those who once walked there. Even now, if you stand in that forest when the fog rolls in and the air grows still, you might feel it too, that faint vibration beneath your feet. Some say it's the wind. Some say it's just imagination. But those who know the story say it's something else. The forest breathing, keeping watch over the one who never truly left.